PTSD. Have you heard those four letters together in that form? PTSD. They occur a lot in recent times. More and more so as veterans come home to the United States from having served in Afghanistan or Iraq. Post-traumatic stress disorder is what those four letters stand for. PTSD. It's more common than we realize. A common phenomenon throughout our society and probably in many places in the world. There are about 3 million cases of PTSD that come up each year. It's a chronic condition caused by witnessing terrifying events and experiencing the overwhelming nature of those events. A chronic condition that can be treated, but sometimes will last a lifetime. An average of 22 veterans commit suicide every day in the United States. 22 every day. Often as a result of PTSD. Why did I start talking about PTSD? Well, because that is what I thought of when I started reading the gospel lesson for today. It causes a little bit of a flashback for me. And perhaps also for you, if you were living here in the New York area back in 2001. The whole idea of those marvelous buildings being torn down or being blown up and destroyed is just beyond our ability to imagine. And what a trauma, what a terrible event that was for us and for the world. Such things should not ever happen. Jesus told this prophecy to his disciples as he was looking at those marvelous buildings there in Jerusalem, and especially the temple, there on Mount Zion, the holy place of God, the place that the prophet said would draw all the nations together to worship God. There on Mount Zion, that temple stood. And Jesus said, not one stone will be left upon another. They will all be torn down. It's hard to imagine what those disciples must have thought when they heard those words of Jesus. It's even harder to imagine what they must have felt when it actually happened, about 40 years after Jesus spoke those words. For at the end of the Jewish revolt, the Romans came into Jerusalem with a terrible vengeance. They killed all the men they could get their hands on. They ravaged the women and children. They destroyed their homes, leaving them in rubble. And then they took the temple and destroyed it completely, removing everything they could from the temple, stripping it bare, and then destroying the building itself. What they did to Jerusalem was so bad that when they plowed over all the land there, they put salt in the land so that nobody would be able to come back later on and plant any kind of crop in that ground. What a terrible thing. And Jesus prophesied that, predicted that, there on that day during Holy Week, just a couple days before he was betrayed and arrested and put on trial and falsely accused and condemned to death, brutally beaten and crucified. Not one stone will be left upon another. Jesus was not some pie in the sky person wondering about the future of the world. No, he was very much a realist, and he knew the existence of evil was real in this world. Something hard for us to cope with. As I was writing the sermon, I must confess to you that in recent years it's become more of a practice of mine to write my sermons like on Thursday or Friday or even sometimes on Saturday. Never on Sunday. Almost never. And of course sometimes I make them up just standing here as well. But this week I wrote my sermon on Wednesday. And I wrote it out longhand in my notebook, not imagining any of the things that were going to happen this week, especially the terrible things that happened in Paris, France on Friday night. What a trauma there must be for a lot of people, and probably for us as well, as we're reminded by the violence of the Islamic radicals who were destroying the lives of people, innocent people, by the hundreds. And of course, their families are affected by it as well, and will be for generations to come. At least we found out last night that the cause of Islamic militarism is global warming. There's too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that's why these Islamic radicals are cutting people's heads off, we were told last night. Well, I'm not sure that that's really true. But we do need to hear these words of Jesus, and what's particularly surprising to us is that in the midst of this terrible prediction that Jesus makes, he says to his disciples, do not be alarmed when you see these things happening, because these are supposed to happen. Do not be alarmed. Really? How can you not be alarmed by the terrible things that he was talking about? How could we not be alarmed by the terrible things we see happening in the world around us? Every morning when I get up, I turn on the news just to see if the world is still there. It's getting to be like that. And yet Jesus says, don't be alarmed. These are but the birth pangs of God's new creation. It takes an awful lot of faith to believe Jesus, doesn't it? In the midst of the things that are going on in the world, it takes a lot of faith to believe in these words of Jesus. But Jesus adds to that a caution to all of us. He says, while you may be very vulnerable, while you may be going through stormy times and stormy seas, while there may be tumults going on in the world, there are going to be people who will try to take advantage of you. There will be people who will come and they will offer solutions, and they are going to fix everything in the world. False messiahs, he refers to them. People who will come offering you answers to all the questions. Ironically, again, we're in the midst of a presidential campaign in which we hear all kinds of people promising all kinds of solutions, and we wonder, are any of these people the Messiah? We had one for the past 6 years who offered us hope and change. Got a lot of change, at least. Half true. Not a lot of hope. But that's what this world needs to recognize. And as Christians, we can take comfort from the fact that there really is a Messiah. His name is Jesus. For 2,000 years, that has been the hope of the Christian community and the message that we proclaim to the world, that there is a Messiah, and he's come and he's dwelt among us, he's lived with us, he's suffered with us, he died for us, and he rose again for us to give us hope. And so in spite of the things that may get us down, in spite of the things that might frighten us, in spite of those things that cause us to be anxious and upset, there is someone we can look to, someone from whom we can find strength and courage and hope. And his name is Jesus. Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus who we call the Christ, the Messiah. And he's the one who gives us confidence in the midst of all the turmoil of life that enables us to continue to stand. You heard that psalm, that beautiful psalm that we sang together just a moment ago. My heart shall rejoice. My body shall rest in hope. That is a Christian proclamation to the world today. And while we are waiting for Jesus to come, while we are waiting for things to be worked out in a real way, in a lasting way for this world, there is plenty for us to be doing. There's so many people out there who are hungry, so many who are homeless, so many who are hurting, so many people who are lonely, so many people who have been abandoned or forgotten. There's so many who are being abused by other people, so many people who are victims of injustice in our society. So many people who need to hear good news. And you and I have heard it. You and I have met Jesus. And he's come to us. And he comes to us again and again whenever we gather together in this place as the people of God. He makes himself present to us in the Word. He makes himself present to us in the meal, his body and blood given and shed for us. And he makes himself present for us in you. For in you, Jesus dwells as well, in the power of the Holy Spirit, for the sake of the world. So there is so much yet to do. We must be honest about it. Christians for 2,000 years have often suffered great persecution because they have stood up and proclaimed their hope in Jesus Christ. But nevertheless, they have endured. And God has been faithful, and God has continued to provide for the needs of his people and for the needs of the world. And so we must not ever be afraid, because Jesus Christ is the risen one. He's the one who's conquered death and sin and evil. And he gives us the power. He gives us the courage to boldly proclaim to all the world that Jesus Christ is Lord. That's my message for you today. It's my message for you every day. In him is our hope. He will not fail us. Keep trusting in him.